What's up, everyone? Tera Roberts here with 4 for 4. Don't sleep on these fantasy football bargains all across the board. Early rounds, mid rounds, late rounds, we're talking bargains that will pay off at their ADP. Let's kick things off in Dallas with Tony Pollard. When the Cowboys first announced that they were releasing Ezekiel Elliott, hype around Tony Pollard was insane. It was looking like he would be a first round pick in fantasy drafts, but things have settled down and attention has shifted to other players. And Pollard's ADP is actually very reasonable now. Pollard sits around RB8 and is a second round pick, meaning that you can start your draft off with a top receiver or draft another running back like Austin Eckler or Bijan Robinson and then draft Pollard as your RB2. And that is quite the bargain for a player who finished as a top 10 back last year despite splitting time with Ezekiel Elliott. Pollard had career highs of 193 attempts, over 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns, and finished as a top 10 back in all scoring formats. Again, very impressive considering that Ezekiel Elliott had 12 rushing touchdowns. Tony Pollard is set to repeat his 2022 performance and has legitimate overall RB1 upside. If your draft strategy involves hitting wide receiver early, but you aren't 100% on board with going 0 RB, drafting a bargain running back in the late third or early fourth round is a happy medium. And the perfect running back for that strategy is Aaron Jones. Yes, Jones shares the backfield with A.J. Dillon. Dillon has had just over 180 carries and 7 total touchdowns in each of the past 2 seasons, and he's finished as an RB2 borderline each year. But despite all of that, Jones has finished as a top 10 back in PPR for the past 4 seasons, one of the league's most consistent runs of success at running back. Jones has a current ADP of RB16, and that makes sense because with AJ Dillon's usage, that top 3 upside that Jones previously had has pretty much disappeared. But he is still a very reliable RB1, and the discount that you're getting on him is well worth the draft pick. We'll get a little bit risky with this next player, but it is still worth the bargain. The combination of a subpar 2022 and the prospect of having Baker Mayfield or Kyle Trask at quarterback has literally obliterated the ADPs of the Tampa Bay receivers. Nothing has changed with their talent. It's literally just the prospect of the Tampa Bay offense potentially being one of the worst in the NFL. But the good news is that with the skepticism around the Tampa Bay offense, their ADPs are very draft friendly. Godwin and Evans will still be a dominating force within that offense, and if I'm picking between the two, my preference is Chris Godwin. The relationship between how Godwin and Evans fit within the offense has been very defined, and while there are coaching staff changes, their usage will likely remain the same. Godwin operates as the volume receiver, and Evans thrives off of big plays and touchdowns, and if I'm going to trust Baker Mayfield to do one thing versus the other, it's hit the volume guy with the shorter routes, if I'm gonna trust Baker Mayfield. Touchdowns could be few and far in between, but targets should keep Godwin more consistent, and he should be a fine bargain in your fantasy drafts. With this next player, we will keep it short and sweet. Diontae Johnson is pound for pound, rank for rank, the best bargain in any fantasy draft. Let's talk about his 2022 performance. Johnson had potentially the most dramatic regression of any healthy player in 2022. Targets, receptions, yardage, and worst of all, he had 0 touchdowns. He finished as wide receiver 30 in PPR. And what makes him such a bargain is that Johnson's ADP is currently wide receiver 32. You can draft Johnson at an ADP that is literally his worst case scenario situation, and he is bound for regression, positive regression. He is a very low risk pick and a huge bargain, a potential wide receiver 1 that you're drafting in the 6th round. Let's also talk about a receiver being drafted right behind Diontae Johnson. At wide receiver 33, Marquise Brown is potentially a huge bargain, and it's very shaky over there in Arizona, so this is a little bit risky. We have no actual timeline on Kyler Murray's return, and we've got a completely new coaching staff with no direct offensive track record that we can actually point to. But that's where the bargain comes in. In 2022, Brown got off to a fantastic start as wide receiver 5, averaging 18 fantasy points per game in PPR before getting injured and coming back to a horrible quarterback situation, averaging under 8 fantasy points per game. So you might have to use Brown strategically early on with matchups until Kyler Murray is back on the field, but when Kyler Murray is back, Brown has legitimate top 12 upside. Moving on to the next player, apparently I just really like this range of receivers, so we will go from wide receiver 33 of Marquise Brown to wide receiver 34, Jahan Dotson. Dotson is one of the riskier players on my list because unlike the aforementioned players, we haven't actually seen Dotson pay off higher than his ADP. And that's because he is a second-year player and coming off a season with some injury limitations. But let's talk about his 2022 statistics to see why there's so much promise here. Dotson had 6 receptions on 8 targets in the red zone last year, and the result was 5 red zone touchdowns. Now, reality check. That is not repeatable usage when played out throughout an entire season. But when a team chooses to immediately give that type of usage to a rookie that quickly, it's clear that the Commanders value Dotson as a key red zone target, and that's an area where Terry McLaurin typically hasn't produced big numbers. The Commanders' offense is now under the leadership of Eric Bieniemy, and he should increase pass volume, and Sam Howell is looking strong in training camp. Dotson should outperform his ADP and could be a 1,000-yard receiver with double-digit touchdowns. Green Bay is another team where there are bargains across the board. I'm absolutely loving drafting Christian Watson as a wide receiver 2 in fantasy drafts, but he is not the only Packers receiver that I am buying into. Romeo Doubs' ADP is a potential huge bargain. His ADP does make sense. A lot of fantasy managers are very skeptical of the Packers offense. Aaron Rodgers is gone. Jordan Love is at quarterback. You've got a young, unproven receiving core. Now, I'm higher on the Packers receivers than most because while I don't think this is going to be an elite offense by any means, it should be an average offense. And that is perfectly fine for the Packers ADP. Love has been in this system for multiple years, and as the clear quarterback 1, he is spending the entire offseason focused on developing chemistry with his lead receivers. And there's a clear connection between Love and Doubs.
Lofting, Doubs, caught! Touchdown, Green Bay!
Doubs' rookie season had some ups and downs, mixed in with some injury struggles, but he had multiple high upside games. Now, I do think that Watson will remain the alpha in this offense, and he's the clear big play receiver, but Doubs could operate more as a volume receiver. A comparison that I like to think of when I'm thinking around Doubs' potential within this offense is how the Buccaneers have used Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. We talked about it earlier. I'm not saying that Watson and Doubs are equal to Evans and Godwin, but I think it's a good way to think of how they could both be viable fantasy options with different types of usage. At his ADP, Doubs really only has to hit a low-end wide receiver 3 to pay off for you and be a bargain. And for our final player, it is time we all stop chasing the Kadarius Toney high and focus on Skyy Moore. The upside within the Chiefs receiving core is often overlooked because the true wide receiver 1 in that offense is Travis Kelce, but it is very possible that a league-winning receiver could come from this group. And if Skyy Moore at his ADP of wide receiver 52 pays off, you will be in fantasy heaven all season long. Moore is being drafted in a nice range of receiving options around players like Elijah Moore and Jameson Williams. I would also consider those players to be fine fantasy bargains. But what separates Skyy Moore is that Moore is a player who can actually lead his receiving core and is tied to the best quarterback in the league. He's got stability, upside, and all he needs is the opportunity. And it sounds like that opportunity is coming because news out of the Chiefs training camp is that Moore has reportedly made significant leaps this offseason and should have a meaningful role in 2023. With Kadarius Toney struggling with injury yet again, Moore is poised to lead the way. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like the video and subscribe and comment below which of these fantasy bargains you're in on drafting. And stick around for more fantastic content.